cloud. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Donna Lange will be presenting this evening on her story about Twice Around the World. She'll be sharing some dynamic stories of her sailing, being offshore in ocean environments on her 28-foot sailboat. She'll be telling us how she manages the challenges on board. And probably more important than that as to how well this changed her life and herself in so many ways. In 2005, 2007, Donna completed a solo circumnavigation of the world via the Cape of Good Hope and Cape Horn, with only 2 stops before crossing her outbound track, becoming the fastest U.S. woman to solo sail the world. 2015, she took off from Bristol, Rhode Island on a nonstop solo circumnavigation, from which she returned at the end of May. Donna is a U.S. Coast Guard 110 Master Captain, professional nurse, BSN, mother of 4 and 11 grandchildren. And with that, I would like now to turn this over to Donna Lange. Donna.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so I'm getting the hang of this as well. I see a bunch of faces, and then I have Bob pins so that I can see my Bob. Bob Filburn, he is my partner and was an incredible, he was my land crew and support system through the 2nd trip around the world. So how's everybody? It's been great to have a chance to meet everybody a little bit before and get a little bit of everybody's stories. There's some amazing sailors out there and lots of great stories, sailing in a lot of parts of the world. People showing up to this wonderful Zoom experience from all over the world. That's pretty exciting. From the West Coast, everywhere, from Athens to all kinds of places. This is pretty exciting that we get to do this. What I normally would do, I have a presentation. I'll put that up. I'll do a screen share of that presentation. And let's see, we gotta, okay, I see some of you are still there. Don't see Bob's face. Let's see. All right. So, you know what? The interesting thing with talking about doing a trip like this is to help people to get an idea of who we all are as people, right? We're all sailors, but we're a lot of other things. I'm going to take 2 seconds. Now, I'm going to try to make sure. I know there are some settings that I might want to adjust here. Optimize share computer sound. So I'm hoping that you will be able to hear this, but I'm only going to play it for 2 seconds, so don't get overwhelmed if it's loud. This is still a little bit of a test. So this is a part of who I am. I'm a musician. I've been a musician all of my life. I play Irish music. I play folk music. I play the Caribbean steel pan. So here's a moment. Let's see what this is. That's me playing Irish drum. Can you hear that, Chris? Can you hear it? Chris, can you hear that? Unmute yourself for a moment.
Turn it off. It's coming through funky.
It's coming off through funky. Okay, so you're not hearing it well. Okay, well, we'll see. Okay, so we won't do that, but I'm hoping that some of the other videos will. But we'll see how we go. So this is me out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean playing my drum to some wonderful Irish music. To the next picture. Okay. So what Bob and I like to do, and normally Bob would do this, but he doesn't have a script handy where he is. So I'm going to do it here for myself. So we like to give a big overview of my sailing because it's difficult for people to get a handle on the big picture and then to be able to put my sailing stories in place. So here we go. So this is something that usually Bob does this for me, but I'm going to do it for you today. Can you imagine leaving the dock on a sailboat only 28 feet long? And one of the ladies here also has a 28-foot boat, knowing that you would not set foot on land or see another person for 9 months. Not 9 days, not 9 weeks, but 9 months. And yet there I was, a 5'1", 54-year-old grandmother of 11 kids in an old boat I had rebuilt myself. Simple, a low-tech, very basic sailboat, no high-tech gear, no high budget anything, only a few friends watched as I sailed away. 20 years ago, at the age of 38, Donna Lange, who also, Chris had said, I'm a nurse, an athlete, was very athletic, a musician, a mother with grandchildren, and a virtual non-sailor. I was motivated by a desperate need. And I think this is part of my story that it will become more understandable a little bit later on in the presentation. But it really was a desperation that I needed to understand myself and life on a deeper level. And I decided to buy a broken down boat, an old sailboat. I was in the Virgin Islands. As one of the wonderful ladies was saying, I had been a charter captain and a chef in the islands. And I bought a boat and I decided to rebuild it. I taught myself to sail and I set off to sail around the world alone. After learning more than I ever thought I would have wanted to have known about engines and navigating, boat building, rigging, sail repair, on in May of 2001, I headed out on my first solo sail from St. John to the United States Virgin Islands, from St. John in the USVI to Rhode Island, planning to sail around the world as a minstrel. On my second leg, I headed off from Rhode Island and I headed off towards Ireland. My second leg was a challenging 33-day crossing to Ireland with only a few days of sunshine on the entire voyage. I lost my self-steering and my primary mainsail, and after 24 days with no sleep, hand steering all the way, 24 hours a day, I finally landed in Ireland. While repairing the boat in Ireland, the idea to sail solo offshore for a longer distance took hold. And on August 21st, in 2003, I set sail bound nonstop for New Zealand. After a punishing force 10 gale off the coast of Europe, off of the Bay of Biscay, I realized my boat was ready and I needed a refit in order to face the Southern Ocean. So I headed back via the Cape Verde Islands to the Caribbean. It took 1.5 years for me to regroup there. I got my 100-ton master's license and completed another really vital refit on the boat and rebuilt the whole deck hull joint of the boat. I have some pictures of that for later. And finally, on November 11th in 2005, I left the dock bound once again nonstop for New Zealand. The first nights it was 20 degrees, 12 degrees below zero. I left in mid-November by the time I got the boat ready to go. So I was running a little bit late. And so for 168 days, 5.5 months, I sailed alone from Rhode Island to the Bay of Biscay in New Zealand. I crossed the North Atlantic and at the very end of the hurricane season. I did Delta, Epsilon, Zeta. It was that year when we had all those storms that went into the Greek alphabet. I survived 60-foot seas around Cape Hope. I crossed the Tasman Sea near her winter, but I powered around the world with my Cape Horn steering vane. Then I had a 6-month stopover. I think my pictures are all behind. I'm not paying attention. I stopped over in New Zealand. And I did some major refit again, because always another refit on the boat. We all know how that goes, right? I took the mast step, I took the mast off, rebuilt the mast step with a huge piece of teak, and fixed a bunch of rigging while I waited for the right timing. And then I went on to sail around Cape Horn. And this is me coming into Puerto Williams, that's Argentina, the rocky coast of Argentina in the background. It's cold. Even in their summer, it's still very cold there. I went on to sail around Cape Horn, and this is my around the world mark. And I stopped in the Caribbean. And then just 250 miles short of completing my circle back to Rhode Island, I hit a major gale with hurricane force gusts. And I ended up suffering a knockdown, and my self-steering had failed, and I hand steered into Bermuda, and then later returned to Rhode Island. So for 290 days alone, and then I wrote a lot of songs while I was out there, and I created a CD of all those songs. So there was more for me. By the time 2014 came along, I sought an even longer extended time offshore. Life was challenging and I wasn't handling being on land that well, even though I had met the love of my life, my Bob. I wanted to discover a true pathway to a true challenging shift, life-changing shift, and I wanted to write a book, and I hadn't been able to write the book. So in 2015, I left from the Herreshoff Museum and planning to be the first U.S. woman to complete a solo world circumnavigation with no stops. Well, there has not been an American woman that has ever, a U.S., I should say, a woman that's ever sailed solo around the world nonstop. So I had a goal to be able to do that. And given the situations that occurred during this sail, it took me to way new places in my experience. I decided to sail around the world with a celestial navigating. I didn't even take a GPS with me. I navigated by the stars. But though I had refitted my self-steering system, I ended up with big struggles with my self-steering. And it made a totally different kind of sail around the world without proper self-steering that was working. In January, after rounding New Zealand, I was in a meteorological bomb, they call it, a big, huge storm. And I was knocked down and I snapped my boom. And the next weeks became really dynamic as I actually built a boom splint, a boom box, I call it. That's supposed to be funny. I'm not very funny very often. But I built the boom box and learned how to sail without the boom, which I actually call soft sailing. And actually was a very positive experience for me, sailing without the boom. So it had gotten to be near the mid of February and the storms, I was running late. There's 11,000 miles between Cape Hope and Cape Horn, and I really needed to be able to stay at the lower latitudes in order to shorten the distance to make it there in time. But given this big storm that had come up, I ended up racing north to 40 degrees south again. And by the time I got to Cape Horn, I was running late and my self-steering was not working at all properly. And I got knocked down twice in 2 hours. Damaged my communications. It snapped one of the blades of my wind generator, so I was no longer able to make power. I lost my Dodger, was completely wept off the whole deck. But more so, the steering vane was failing, and there was no way that I was going to be able to sail the ocean storms that I was going to meet going around Cape Horn. So I made a decision to head for the Panama Canal and headed for higher ground. Really the experience I sought from the very beginning, which was really a quiet experience of actually getting true to myself. As the sea state settled and the winds became calmer, the warmth returned. The beauty and wildlife of the ocean was energizing, and I faced a lot of challenges, but my challenges coming up to the Panama Canal was that I had no wind at all. I had 15-foot tides, strong headwinds, and I averaged 1 knot for 500 nautical miles, if you can imagine. Averaging that slow, being beaten back by the currents, not being able to sleep 24 hours a day, because if I wasn't keeping the angle of the boat as true as I could to the current, I would be swept at 2 knots backwards. It was a really difficult, challenging time, but during that time, interestingly enough, that's when I found the true communion that I had been looking for in my own personal meditation time with life energy, and it was an amazing wholeness that I sought and I found in this very challenging time. So this is, I know I love to give these presentations. It's a great time to talk of hope. And certainly my pathway getting to the sea isn't of anybody that was really experienced. I didn't have a lot of training or teaching, but I am someone that's a learner. I'm a natural learner, and I have spent every minute of my life investing and learning something new every day. And when I came to trying to sail around the world, all of a sudden everything I needed was there. So I'm here to tell you a little bit more about my story And one of the few people, not that many people, have sailed around the world twice. So I look forward to sharing the rest of my story. So thanks so much, Chris, for hanging out and catching up with me and giving me the opportunity to do this with you all. It seems odd, actually, in this environment because I can't hear you in the background. Everybody's so quiet. Usually you have some kind of interaction with everybody during the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them up in that chat. And Chris, if I don't see the chat, because I'm not sure that I have the view to see the chat, please, anybody that has a question, please stop me. How does everybody feel at this point? Do you have a little bit of idea of the overview of my sailing?
Donna, it's Craig. We love what you're doing and love exactly what you're saying, because being sailors, we want to hear what you're really doing and what's really happened and some of your thoughts. So we really appreciate what you're going. So we encourage you to continue on.
Right. Thanks very much. I appreciate that input. I really do. All right, so I do use a little bit of a script because otherwise I lose track and time goes by way too fast. We're already probably way farther into time than I normally would be at this time. But a little bit about the backstory. Again, usually my Bob, he does that introduction and I play a little Irish whistle and it's kind of theatrical. You know, it is amazing because the Pelagic Club is exactly the kind of environment where people can learn how to sail. And people who are sailors get a chance to invest in people who are learning to sail, people that are crew that don't want to go through the tragedy, which it is, of owning your own boat. It's quite difficult. It's a lot of work. It's a real commitment, owning a sailboat, and especially if you're not living on it full time. So I really appreciate everything that Pelagic Club is doing. So thanks all of you for doing it so many years. So, you know, this is one of my quotes. It takes a really great investment in anything that we want to accomplish. So anyone that thinks that they're going to go sailing or anything you want to do, to me, my experience in my life is that my life has been about making an investment, whether it was playing music, how many hours a day you practice, whether it's being on the internet, whether it's learning how to do something, whether it's reading Chapman's you know, handbook of sailing from the start to the finish. Whatever that investment is, if we want to accomplish something and grow and really meet our destiny, we need to make that investment. And that's what I think part of my world was about, was that I had an ability to do that. And so then when I got challenged, I had someplace to go and I had someplace to grow to. So it's a great, this is kind of my story. When I talk about my story, I was at a place, and I will talk about that, where I really was in a desperate place and I needed to find answers. So my going sailing was something brand new. At 38 years old, I had never been sailing. At 38 years old, I had had a lot of experience with boats, with boating and canoeing and kayaking, the river. I had loved the woods. I lived in the mountains of New York, but not on the ocean. So it was an amazing thing to be brought to the sea. I knew there had to be an answer. I knew there had to be a way. Knowing empowered me. I was willing to find it. Then life led me to the sea, and I believed. But it was really about those that believed along with me that have really empowered me and helped me. So it really took 2 times around the world for me to find the answers that I was looking for. Half a year around the world wasn't enough. And then the second half of my trip around the world really got interrupted, which is too long of a story to tell. But by the time I finished the first trip, I think I really knew that I still needed a long time out on the ocean alone before I was going to find the answers I was looking for. I was recently we were guests at a yacht club on the west coast of Florida. And, you know, I'm babbling on, telling stories about sailing, and we're having lunch and everything. And, you know, I'm not thinking too much about talking about what I've experienced and where I've been. And all of a sudden, this woman that's at the table, she looks at me with this bizarre, like, bewildered look. And she says, She says, "What is wrong with you?" I mean, like, she really looks at me like, "What's wrong with you? You're really a weirdo. Are you crazy? I mean, this stuff you're doing is insane. It's crazy." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, you know what? Well, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I really do think there's something wrong with me. My path in life has been an interesting challenge. I don't look crazy necessarily today, but it was really challenging. I didn't go sailing because I just happened to decide I wanted to go sailing. It was a gift to me that was given to me at a time in my life when I was very desperate. Sailing around the world has become the medium of the greatest discoveries of my life, my true self. It would transform my inspired insanity to inspired sanity as I returned, and truthfully, the pieces have really fallen together for me. All right, so how is it that a 38-year-old country girl from upstate New York ends up on a traditional tall ship in Baltimore, and suddenly I'm propelled into a brand new life? I became the fastest U.S. woman to solo circumnavigate the world, and a rare 2-time solo sailor through the Panama Canal the 2nd time. So how has that happened? Well, challenges. My story's not just about having challenges, overcoming them. It's really being about having the challenges be the diving board or the propulsion into in being powered in my life to my real destiny. So I've come to know over time that I have Asperger's. I mean, actually, that was something I was able to put a name to after I got back, but it was something I knew. There was a challenge for me from the time I was very small. It's a very high functioning type of autism because I'm obviously very skilled. I have a lot of skills, but then you add to that a bit of childhood trauma. And my life story has been that of a very bright and gentle soul, but I never made it through the childhood developmental stages. I was the kid that cried through holidays, that played alone on the playground. I didn't figure out how to integrate with peers. I had problems with my knees. I was a scared child. I had bad nightmares, and I did the best I could to please others. Cycles developed my life that were incredible highs, and then I had deep lows, and I had really deep depressions. I learned to play instruments, though. That's what you do when you're good at being by yourself for many, many hours up in your bedroom as a teenager, and then playing steel pan hours and hours and hours alone on my sailboat. I can play instruments. I love to sing. I have a very pretty voice. I was a missionary, and I gained a bachelor's degree in nursing at 30 years old. After I'd had my children, I went back to school and finally got that degree that said that I was smart. Later on, I would go on to get a master's degree. My ex-husband built small boats. I knew how to use epoxy. I knew how to use hand tools. I knew how to use a belt sander. And I could learn anything. And I became fitness guru. I was very strong and trained hard. But then I would plummet into severe depressions and poor decision making, and there were some disastrous outcomes, and that's hard to say, to explain what that's like. And then in 1998, my world crashed when somehow I initiated a fatal car accident. And people died. Several people died. And I had no way to get back up. There was no drugs, no alcohol. It was coming home from a late night work nursing. I had been a missionary and was tired, didn't know how tired I was, and it was a bad day. I was the problem in my life, and I had no way to stop being me. But then life opened up something brand new. And I was at a point where I was willing to go. I mean, it's hard to imagine the kind of decisions that occur in life where you just all of a sudden decide. My kids were all older teenagers, and they were in different places. I had separated from my husband, and I was watching rainbows, and I had gone to volunteer on this tall ship. Virginia Wagner was the captain, and I took my hand to the tall ship. Was quite remarkable. I knew how to do things that nobody else on the boat knew how to use. As I said, I knew how to use a belt sander. I found that amidst the sailors on that boat, I actually found, like, for the first time in my life, I had found like church. You found 15 people on a boat and everybody worked 1,000%. Everybody loved what they were doing. I was able to hand over hand align you know, that was probably 2 inches around, up like 20 feet in the air, and that gave me permission to be able to climb in the yard arms. That yard arm you can see there at the top. It's interesting because you know, you climb all the way up there in the rigging and you pull that sail in. And at one point, it was a blustery night and got to pull in that sail up on the yard arm with another young sailor. And it was just an incredible experience. And it just set me off. It's like, I gotta go sailing. And I ended up joining the boat for a whole season as a ship's cook. I was a really good cook, and everybody enjoyed all my late night snacks that I used to make, and it was very empowering, and everybody on the boat seemed to play an instrument. And we used to hang out at midnight after all of our sails for the day were done in Baltimore Harbor, and we'd all pull out our instruments and play and sing, and it was really quite remarkable. So one night, I should say one day, Virginia, the captain of the boat, was a very accomplished sailor and taught celestial navigation. She came down into the galley, and she invited me to go on the next ship that she was commissioned to do, which was the 2000 rally around the world on the America II tall ship. And it blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get to go sailing around the world. It was just the most incredible thing. And then a few weeks later, she comes down and she has to tell me that the guy that was delivering the boat went aground, took out the entire keel, the boat was going to be in the yard, and that sail was off. But interestingly enough, it wasn't off for me. After that, I just had this vision of going sailing, and I had to go sailing. I ended up catching up with a guy that was looking for a chef to go down to the Caribbean, and I jumped off a big leap and got on an airplane. My 3 kids were all doing what they did home, and they were, one daughter was in college, other was in school. They were all in a place where they were taken care of, and I just went sailing. I didn't know how to sail when I got down there, and I learned a little bit about sailing as a charter chef on a boat, and then eventually I rented a sailboat, brought my boys down to sail with me, and had my first experience sailing by myself around the Virgin Islands. I knew every harbor in the Virgin Islands from the charter seasons that I had been there, but all of a sudden I was sailing in them and my own, and within a very short time of being down there, and within a year, I bought my boat, a Southern Cross 28. So that was 20 years ago. And since then, I've sailed 100,000 blue water miles offshore. I have become the ultimate survivor. I'm really good at sailing around the world. But I still find that I'm not really that good at leading just a normal life at home. And again, despite having met Bob, an amazing partner and wonderful, wonderful human being, I still, I can't see Bob's face here. I wish I could somehow come up with his face, but I can't find him.
Donna, to get his face, if you scroll down, if you go on to the gallery view, and you can right click on him and say pin.
All right, I see. I already have him pinned, but he's not coming up. So I'm unpinning him, and then if I pin him again, will that bring him up? I hope, there he is. Now I see him. All right, now I don't see anybody else, but I see Bob. All right, so that's terrific. Hi, Bob. Okay, so, all right, so one thing I could do was sail around the world. For whatever reason, it's something that I can do. I'm just tough as frickin' nails, and nothing is ever going to stop me, and I'm never going to quit, and I can fix things. I can take pain and hardship. My longest time, I've been 8 months offshore nonstop. So, all right, so these are my sails around the world. You can see the gray line was my first sail around the world. Something that this map doesn't show very well is because it's a square vision of the world, we don't realize that South America is twice that wide on a globe. Africa is twice that wide on a globe. So the first time around the world, when I went around when I were around Cape Hope, and then the first time around, I don't know why this says I went below New Zealand. I didn't. I actually went between Tasmania, and I stopped in New Zealand. And then from New Zealand, I went around Cape Horn. But notice that Cape Horn is east of New York. And I think that's something people don't realize. So the first time when I went around the world, I stopped in Cape Horn. But after that, I had to go 40 degrees to the east to get around South America. And I had to go that full 40 degrees back to get back to the Caribbean and then back to Rhode Island. So it's actually, it's a long way around the world when you leave from Rhode Island. The second time I planned, well, I still was planning to do that. And even this trip would have been even longer if I had made it around Cape Horn, because I went straight across the Atlantic before I headed and went down below New Zealand and Tasmania. But I did not make it around Cape Horn. So there's a visual of the trips, the two different trips. So land life has always been harder for me than being at sea somehow. Humanity is an interesting character, and I guess in lieu of our lives today, maybe it seems even stranger. I find the ocean and the natural world is much easier to manage. The rules and the laws are much more straightforward. It's even harder today. So. But even after all I had accomplished, there was a day in 2014 when my work world was failing. I wasn't able to be a teacher. Again, being an Asperger's kid, I didn't realize what was wrong. All I knew is that I could not function in the same kind of places that normal people function. The gray area of life, it seems that most of what people function in today is a gray area of life, and I see the world in very black and white standards, and I found it very difficult, and I wasn't able to succeed at many things in my world, and I wasn't able to be a teacher. I wasn't able to, working even as a nurse was difficult, working with a team of nurses was hard, and I finally decided in 2014 that I was falling apart. And Bob is amazing as he has been. He was watching me fall apart. He was watching me basically fall into I guess it's a nervous breakdown, if you want to call it that. I was really struggling, and we were on our way doing a delivery north, and we ended up on a boat that Bob has a yacht management company, and we were delivering a power boat north. And we ended up in Liberty Landing. And we met this amazing couple that were sailors in the dock. And I went and got together with Dottie in a matter of 2 hours of an amazing synchronistic chat with her. It became very evident when I talked about my world that I was ready to sail around the world again. Bob and I had talked about it many times, and that it was the time. And so I spontaneously decided that I was going to just sail around the world. I came up from a chat with Dottie. We were on top of their boat. We came up through the companionway, and Bob is coming back through, and there I am telling him I'm going to sail around the world. And Bob, you have to unmute yourself. You think you can unmute yourself? He's on his phone. Maybe not. Is that going to work, Bob? I can't unmute him, I don't think, for him.
Chris, can you unmute him?
Can't find his name.
Robert's iPhone.
Oh, Robert. Okay, I was looking for Bob.
Sorry.
While we're waiting, there were some
There you go.
questions. Oh, sorry.
Okay, there were some questions. Okay, go ahead.
Tell us more about the what you had for self-steering and what broke.
We're gonna. I am gonna get there. I promise you. That is. We have all that's coming, and it's 7:38, so I know I have to move faster. So, you know, this is the part of the story that really talks about why I sailed around the world. The sail around the world, as I said, it wasn't about just accomplishing a feat. But let's move a little bit faster through the story. I planned this particular trip, the second trip around the world, I planned on purpose to be a little easier. I'm 50 years old. You're okay, Bob. I've got you. You can talk if you want.
Yeah, I don't. Okay.
Okay, all right. So if you want to interject, you can. All right.
Good.
All right. So I planned this trip to be much gentler so that I would be in trade winds. I left really early. I left on July 31st in August so that I would do an August crossing of the North Atlantic before hurricane season. My first trip, I left late and I got hit by all kinds of late hurricanes. So this time I planned to leave early. And so that I would also be able to do the 11,000 miles from Cape Hope to Cape Horn in time. So during this particular trip, this is my second sail around the world, and so I'm trying to do some different things. One thing I tried was I brought pilot kites in case I dismasted, so I'd have propulsion outside of having just the sails in case I lost my mast. I did wildlife research, and I ended up coming across some very interesting thing about sargasso weed. We have this monstrous sargasso overbloom, and I was able to do some research for that. And I also put a flotation system on my boat in lieu of sinking, so that in lieu of sinking. So instead of waiting for my boat to sink, I worked for Cito for a season. So I used to be part of a dive team that would go down and resurrect boats by putting float bags underneath of them. It seemed silly to me that I would wait till my boat sank to have float bags. So I worked with Subsalve, and we built a flotation system for my boat so that I wouldn't sink. And the other thing was I did decide I was going to celestial navigate around the world. So I took lessons from Halsey Herreshoff to boost my celestial navigation, and that was pretty amazing. So one of the things that's important, and I'm going to get to things like how I got around with my steering vane, but one of the things I did was a monster refits to the boat. So my boat was a 1982 Southern Cross, and I have done multiple refits from the very beginning. What you're seeing right here is my son took out one of the major bulkheads, which was obviously delaminating, and he put in brand new bulkheads. He also built an area underneath where the mast step was, reinforced the deck. And earlier, before I went around the world the first time, and I have some other pictures of that, but I have a doubt that we're gonna have time to see all those, where we built this monster rail. My deck and hull joint had been compromised. So I built with my ex-husband, my sons, Sicilian cherry that wraps around the whole deck of the boat. So it's a very, very stout little boat. You can see here we redid and did a non-skid and the deck. I learned to celestial navigate. I had a wind generator. This is my old ampere that I had used on my first trip around the world. I had a KISS generator donated. So I actually put that up. In the end of the day, I needed to resurrect my ampere because I ended up breaking a blade on the KISS generator. So I had that. You can see my boat's nice and shiny with new paint, and my son and good friends all were helping with my getting ready to go. So again, I celestial navigated, that was a totally different kind of way to work my way around the world. I had never done it before, functioning only on a compass. What you see here in this picture is a knot stick. So it's basically a fish weight to figure out the weight of a fish, and it's designed with a little disc on the end so that it floats through the water, and with the power of the water against the disc, it pulls this piece out, and it essentially is calibrated to tell you how fast your boat's going over the water. It's not a GPS setting of how fast you're going over the land. It's just a boat speed. So between the compass, the knot stick, my time, In celestial navigation, I was able to plot my space in my course, dead reckoned around the world. I did have an aurora tracker. I also had a secondary inReach tracker, which became important, that augmented my celestial navigation. So as much as I was wanting and celestial navigating, which I did exclusively for the first 3 months, I was still getting position 1 or 2 times a day or once a day. Bob was sending me that, so I was able to keep, you know, I knew where I was. It wasn't that scary that I didn't know, but it was a totally different way, and I did plot my track. I think somewhere I have a picture of my plotting as we go along here. And this was an amazing, this is an actual Weems and Plath sextant that was donated to me to be used for the trip by a gentleman from 1976 it came from. So it was a pretty amazing thing to be able to do that. Crossing the North Atlantic, I had the sea madness times when I couldn't, when I didn't have any wind at all, of course. I had water concerns. I had planned my food based on ideology. So my trip around the world, I knew that canned food wasn't going to work, and so I planned a totally dried food diet, essentially, with a lot of extras. But what I did was created a package of food for every 90 days or for every 30 days. So I had 9 or 10 of these packages, and so I had a 1 month supply of food, and then I had 5-gallon buckets of oatmeal. Green powders like beets and spinach and kale and things like that that were supposed to be my green boost of energy. Essentially, I put a diet on board that I thought was going to be really good for me, and I was going to get healthy and keep me energized. Unknown to me, though, I am allergic or whatever to quinoa or something that was on my boat, and I had a very bad time digesting the food that I had on board, and I got really skinny. It was pretty explosive at times. Thank God I was all by myself on the boat because it was really, really nasty. So maybe it was all that green food I put on the boat, or the quinoa, or maybe it was a lot of powdered peanut butter. But my diet was healthy, supposedly, and I did manage to get around the world on it. But it was an interesting challenge. So this is a kind of, I don't think the audio is going to come out on this, but I just wanted you to get an opportunity to see. This is me inside my boat.
Yeah, the audio is
really
terrible,
right
Donna.
up for hail, and I'm expecting a bunch of thunderstorms to follow me that day. And this is me sailing along. I don't know what the blue marks on the screen are from. Just for you to get
Donna, can you shut off your audio on the TV?
Hang in there, hang in there. I just want this, I think this.
Donna, can you shut off the volume on your computer? It's coming
And
terrible.
that is my boat from the inside.
So, our little world ends up kind of in the middle of the store. All right.
There we go. All right. One thing that was giving me a lot of trouble was my steering vane. My steering vane is a very simple mechanism. But one of the things that needs to happen is that there is a core of metal that goes through the boat, a tube that goes through the boat, and it has to be able to swivel, and it has bushings so that that swivel of it is very friction free. And what I didn't know was that in my in the refit of the steering vane, the bushings for that weren't included, and I did not end up being able to do that. And over the course of time during this trip, the friction became so great that the steering vane was not able to work to steer my boat. So it became a really difficult challenge. When you're in the Southern Ocean, you have storms. Let me go back to this. This was the servo. There were two things that were happening. One was the loss of effort on the rudder, but also I was having trouble with the actual rudder for the steering vane was breaking away. So essentially what it did was it created a different way for me to be sailing. Instead of just sailing through storms as I had done the first time around the world, I was trying to avoid them. And I ended up in the northern boundaries that were above these storms. And in doing so, it ended up that I had a lot of northwest winds, and they were right on top of the southwest swell. And they were creating these monster rogue waves and a lot of very dynamic steep seas that were only 15 feet high. They weren't terribly large, but they were very, very confused, and the rogues just lived within them. And I would just hear a roar coming from the distant sound, and then I would get hit hard with a hard swell that would break over the side of the boat and slap me over, and I was dealing with that a lot. This picture right here is actually, it's below, this is Africa, and this is Madagascar, so I'm here between Australia, and that's where this picture is of this big dynamic low, and you can see the next low that is that I'm heading towards. So these were the kinds of situations that occurred. Okay. All right, so I'm fast forwarding the story, and I've made it around, had an amazing Christmas. I went below New Zealand, Tasmania. So I had one meteorological bomb in the straits below Australia. And then went below Tasmania, and the Sydney to Hobart race actually was taking off at the very same time, which was really interesting for Bob and I, because Bob's boss, or a gentleman we've worked for a lot, has a company that builds beautiful mega yachts, but they also, he is Mark Richards, who is the captain of Wild Oats, who is a sailboat that had won this amazing Sydney Hobart race for 11 years in a row. So it was incredible, because that race actually took part on Boxing Day. I was actually right below Tasmania, and this was a monster storm. It was really a very bad race, and a lot of boats had a really rough time. And I was just south of them, and then went below New Zealand, which was my lowest point. Actually, yeah, I think it was my lowest point, or close to the lowest point that I had during the trip. And then another meteorological bomb developed off of New Zealand. And during this time, again, because of the difficulty I'd had with the steering, I ended up and snapped my boom. It was actually, I had already had it tied down to the deck of the boat. But it, despite the fact that this boom, the way it was constructed, had no lateral stability. So when it went sideways, it completely crushed sideways. So at this point in my story, I'm making decisions about what I'm going to do. And again, the videos aren't really happening here. But this is, even if you can just see this without the voice, you can see how ragged I was. This was 2 days after I had snapped the boom, and I've got a cut on my head and black eye. So my goal at this point was I needed to be able to fix the boom. So it took about a week for me to come up with a plan. Of course, I know I didn't say completely, I have a Cape Horn steering vane, which was my automatic steering. I had on board a complete satellite system that from Louis Soltero and the folks at Global Marine Networks. I had met Louis during my first sail around the world, and he sponsored me from New Zealand through the rest of my trip. He has sponsored me with Oceans Watch and with Cruising with a Cause, which are my non-for-profit works. And when I told him I was going to go sail around the world again, he totally went in 1,000%, and I had his satellite system on board. So I did have email, I had a telephone, I had communication, I had some weather from them through the grid files and such. So I had that all on board. I'd like to be able to say that. So at this point, I am communicating with Bob, and I'm at a point in my journey where I'm wondering whether, given my self-steering isn't working, I didn't doubt that I could sail without the boom. I knew I could sail without the boom, but I hadn't done it before. But whether or not I really should go into New Zealand and fix the steering, because I just had no idea how I was going to get around Cape Horn and finish my trip without my self-steering working properly. But it was interesting. I called Bob, and one of the first things when I started to talk about the challenges, he automatically in his mind, you know, okay, go get them, and you know, we're just going to fix the boom and we'll get you off and running again. And I basically I decided at that moment, you know, he's right. I'm not going to quit. I've not quit up until now. I'm not going to quit now. And we started working on a plan for me to fix the boom. So I devised a wooden box. And it was interesting because I was lacking a very solid piece of wood to be able to use for the boom box. And it turned out that during our getting ready to go, that Bob had inadvertently, I asked him to buy a piece of wood for this simple project, and he had bought this piece of oak. And at the time, I looked at him like, Bob, why did you buy a piece of oak? You know, it was this very heavy and it was very expensive piece of wood. And all I needed to do was something very simple. I needed a fiddle inside a compartment. And at this point, I realized that piece of oak was going to be, now I knew why he bought the piece of oak. You're never going to know when you're going to need a piece of oak. And it became the backbone to this refit. So I ended up cutting slats from my companionway hatch boards and adding them to the piece of oak. But what I needed to do was I also needed to be able to cut the ends of the there. You can see the broken end at the top there. And I had nothing but a hacksaw on board to do the work. So I cut it with a hacksaw. I cut the second end. I mean, I had already pulled all of the lines out of the other half of the boom, and you can see the orange lines here were the snakes, so that I'd be able to put the lines back in when I finished. And then I went on to refit the boom.
Alrighty, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Work all day.
Go to the next one. There it is. So you can see the boom box is there. I basically made it work in the companionway on my boat, and figured out a way with the epoxy that I had on board. I had Vixo. It's kind of like a pro set. It's a kind of epoxy where you mix the two, the catalyst and the resin. It puts it out in a certain proportion, and so that I could mix up as much as I needed, and I was able to make that repair. I also ended up tapping the box right into the boom, besides the fact that the whole thing was epoxied and glued. So it is rock solid. It's still on my boom today. But in the meantime, I also learned how to sail my boat without and I actually, because given the difficulty I was having with self-steering, whenever I was sailing downwind, you can imagine that the self-steering is steering very broad. I'm not sailing a very broad boat. And so inevitably, with the boom, with the backwind boom, and end up in arms, nights, it was really difficult. And it was very loud. It was a traumatic time trying to sail downwind. I found that once the boom was broken and I had no boom, and I started sailing without it, that actually the shape of the sail became very, very flexible.
We're getting back
I had the crew attached to the cockpit combing, and what I did is I adjusted the tack so it was shorter, so that my mainsail basically flew like a trysail. A sail that was shorter on the mast, and then it was able to dip down into the cockpit And I even learned how over time how to be able to short sail so that I could sail closer to the wind. I absolutely fell in love with sailing my boat without the boom. So
Donna,
you can
move
see
forward a
here
slide?
where I have,
Donna, can you move forward a slide? We're getting background noise on this with
you can see how I have the clews attached to each other and how it tightened everything up nice and tight. I managed to make the whole thing work. It worked as a fabulous water catcher. It was quite remarkable. So I'm hearing that we have maybe some connection problems. This is the way the boom looked when I finished it. What you're looking at is the piece of oak side and all of the screws that were tapped into it. I coated the whole thing with epoxy to keep the plywood from delaminating. This is actually a video of my wonderful time. These are whales that I came across in a becoming. You can see there's one here that's going to just about cross in front of my boat. Right there, right there it is. It crosses right in front of me. They weren't terribly large, but probably a bunch of gray whales. There's my. So this was finally, I learned actually how to, I have all kinds of ways I've learned to jury rig sails on my boom once I got it done. It was quite remarkable, the flexibility I gained, both by now having the boom, but also being able to sail the sail completely off the boom. It was really quite amazing. So once I get around Cape Horn, I got towards Cape Horn, I was 1,200 miles away. I rolled the boat twice and I decided to head on towards the Panama Canal. And I had already looked at the pilot maps and pilot charts, and I realized that it was going to be really hard to sail into Panama. All of the currents, all of the tide, all of the winds were going to be against me, and it actually was a real difficult time. But my time between Cape Horn and Panama was the most blissful sailing that I had done. One of the things I did have to do was I had to replace the wind generator. So it was a bit of a trial to get the wind generator down. It's a big, huge engine, kind of a big alternator that's way up in the air. But I rigged up a bunch of blocks and such on my backstay and was able to drop it down to the cockpit, take off one wind generator, put on the others, and I set up blocks all the way around my cockpit to be able to get the new generator up and running, and I was back in power. And at this time, you know, the question was, do I need to go in and get saved? Do I need to go in and fix things? And I just wanted to go sailing, and thank God Bob was 1,000% on board with me and knew I was absolutely safe and sound. I could sail. I still had texting on my the DeLorme tracker, and I still was being tracked. And then somehow the power cord to the tracker finally got corroded and stopped working. And then I finally, for the first time during the trip, I had no tracker and I totally relied on celestial navigation for 10 days. I was able to communicate with some ships and keep in touch with Bob, if just once every other day or 2 days, but it was enough that he knew that I was safe and I was sailing well without all of the instruments. I had nothing except just a compass and my sextant, and it was pretty remarkable. It was spectacular. I had the most in-tune time ever. I learned to meditate in a way that's been incredible. It was the most amazing gift to me those days from Panama, 6 weeks, more detached and more in touch and in tuned with Wise Mother Ocean, with life energy, and it was the most amazing time of my life. As I approached Panama, I ended up with this 15-foot tide, which I didn't know about, which, you know, one of the challenges when you don't know why you're being thwarted. So, and that 15-foot tide was one of the things that nobody seemed to let me know. And that was the basis for these incredible currents that were coming towards me. I knew there were strong headwinds, and I knew that the current was not in my favor, but this 15-foot tide that was coming through the Panama Canal, that I had not considered. I averaged 1 knot for that last 3 weeks. So it was really, really harrowing. I got to the end of my rope over and over again. But it was in those quiet places that, again, I really found my own peace in my own space. All right, it is 8:02. Chris, how we doing? Any questions?
Lots of questions, and thank you.
Are we still online?
Yep, we're still there. We're still going.
Hello?
Can you not hear me?
Hello? Is there anybody out there?
Yes, we're here. You gotta turn up the volume on your computer.
Can you hear us?
No, she's got the volume down on her computer. So we can hear you, Donna, but you can't hear us because you turned the volume down.
Okay.
So turn the volume back up and we'll be all good.
Chris,
Yep, turn the volume back up and we'll be all
I
good.
think
Can you hear
we're, I
us?
think we're,
We good?
okay. Am I up now?
You're still up. Yep. So
Can
we
you
have,
hear me now?
yep, we can still hear you.
Okay.
We've never lost you. You just turned the volume down on your computer, so we didn't quite hear you. So we got a couple questions.
Okay.
The first one was from Daryl, way back in the beginning.
Okay.
You want to learn more about your self-steering years and what happened there?
You know, the self-steering vane is, it's a Cape Horn. So it's a single stand in the back. It works with a servo rudder. And the effort from the sail from left to right only moves a small piece, about 1/4 of an inch. And at that point, the servo rudder is supposed to catch the water. And when it gets pulled by the water sideways, that's the effort that's put onto my tiller to steer. What had happened is that the bushings on the inside and on the outside became worn out. When I had asked Eve and Eric to send me a refit, for some reason they didn't send me those bushings. And so I didn't realize that they needed to be replaced. In the end of the day, it was a bad mistake because for most of the trip, I really struggled without having enough effort on the self-steering. And in the end, it ended up making me extremely vulnerable. And there was no way I could get around Cape Horn because the weather patterns that were developing were all out of the northwest, and they were going to be really strong. I was going to need to be able to steer, I mean, big seas, and that wasn't going to happen the way, with my self-steering the way it was. When I got to Panama, it was a simple solution. Replacing the bushings was very simple to do. So it was unfortunate that I didn't find it at the beginning. And there's no way I could really address it offshore because there's no way I could get off the boat and take the vane apart. I didn't have a dinghy or anything on board at the time, so.
Well, Larry is very concerned about your health, and he wanted to know about the knockdowns, what kind of injuries you incurred.
I really didn't. I ended up hitting my face. For the most part, again, there was no way that I knew I could not hand steer the ocean. My doggy. So I was down below a lot during the main storms. And when I took the knockdowns, I heard them coming. So I was below. So mostly it was just a matter of my knees that came to my face because I was pretty well tucked in down below. So I didn't really have those injuries. Let me get my dog. The other injuries, the other challenges were, you know, there were different things I did on deck that was challenging. Getting up the boom or getting up the mast is certainly challenging. I mean, but I didn't have any major injuries. I was very fortunate that I didn't. On my first trip around the world, I did a bad split on the deck and I really hurt my back. And that was really challenging to do 4.5 more months at sea with a bad back, with a lot of sciatica pain. But the second trip around the world, I really didn't have that so much.
What was it like to roll?
Oh, well, so in a description, the forces when I roll are quite remarkable. So here's a concept. Underneath my companionway, I had already taken the slats away from the companionway because I had turned them into the boom box. So I had cut them. So right underneath, I had a 5-gallon bucket of water. that was full from water I had collected, because I collected water. I didn't have any water makers or anything on board. And so when I rolled, if you can imagine, a 5-gallon bucket is sitting on the floor, and the power of the roll moved the boat out from under the bucket. I went over 90 degrees. When I came back up, the bucket was sitting on the counter. 90 degrees. And it was full of water still. So the power and the forces when a boat rolls like that, you have all of the centrifugal, all that force is just really dramatic. So the first time near Cape Horn, I had rolled before, and I snapped the boom, and I had taken lots of knockdowns where the mast went in the water and came back up, but it wasn't as deep a roll. When I was around Cape Horn, the roll was much more dramatic. I went more than 120 and back up. And the second time, it took quite a long time for the boat to come back up. I was fortunate I didn't take out a whole lot of water, but the second time I really did lose my gear off the deck. Although I did not lose the mast. The sail was fine. I did not, because I didn't have much sail in the air at the time. The rig came back up fine. So that's why after that, there was really no reason for me not to continue to sail. I was fine to sail on to Panama.
And somebody asked about tracking weather. What'd you use for that? And then the other thing is, what about fresh water? How'd you get that?
Yeah, I did. As I said, I got sponsored during the second half of my first sail around the world. When I was in New Zealand, I met Global Marine Networks. I met Louis Soltero and Jonathan Selby, and they sponsored me with equipment. And so the second trip, when I went to Louis and said, now I want to sail nonstop around the world, he got totally on board. So I had internet. So as far as having information available to me, I had that. I couldn't have big pictures. It all had to come through the compression that comes through on an onboard system. So, but the grid files are specifically set up to come through their, the compressed file size that they have access to. And then I also had another, Joan Conover, an amazing sailor friend, who was sending me stuff from Boy Weather. So I had good weather input for the most part. The challenge is that weather forecasting is what it is. In New Zealand, I also picked up a wonderful weather router, Bob McDavitt. He does weather and such and routing and such for racers and such in New Zealand area. Chris Parker helped me with weather routing at times. But interestingly enough, you know, the interesting thing about weather is that it isn't interested in human models, as we know. So in the end of the day, it was really a day-by-day process. It was actually frustrating to have be given weather that turned out to not be correct. I'd make decisions based on what the weather was supposed to do, and then it wouldn't happen. And I spent a lot of energy worrying about it and the anticipating of storms. In the end of the day, I could have used less, maybe. You know, you just really needed to see where major things were occurring instead of being given input on a day-to-day basis. So. But I did have weather and water. I didn't have a water maker, so I relied on the intercoastal, in the interconvergent zones between the North and South Atlantic. Was a place where typically in the world they have the kinds of thunderstorms that can fill your tanks. I ended up being able to put foam in my scuppers. My Southern Cross 28 has a big tow rail, so it stands 4 inches up. So I actually have a surface on my boat that can collect water. There were 2 scuppers where the water would go out, and I was able to put foam in those places. I also miraculously, my son happened to put it on my boat when he had taken my boat to the Bahamas, but I had a dinghy pump with a 15-foot long hose on it. And the interesting thing about that was it allowed me to be able to get water from the deck right down into the cockpit into a bucket. So I was collecting water and we were putting it in these 5-gallon buckets that I had. And for keeping my tank, I had 50-gallon tank, and then I had a 13-gallon bladder that somebody lent to me. So I had the ability to have, 63 gallons. Half a gallon a day is all I used. I ended up using more water than I really thought about, because I had taken so much powdered food. Everything had to be hydrated. So at one point, when I was concerned about water, I started using more salt water. I didn't bring any salt. It's always seemed kind of silly to bring salt on a trip like mine when you've got surrounded by salt water. So at times I used a bit of salt water when I was concerned. I did have one period between Cape Coast and Australia that I thought that I was going to run out, and then a mysterious storm occurred, and I managed to fill my tanks. God was faithful, let me tell you. So it's a good story. The real book is going to be a good story.
And that
There are a
leads us,
lot of
that leads us to our next question. Have you written a book, and tell us about what the book's going to be? And I know the answer to this, so go for it. Tell us about the book.
the book is my story, but it's not like a complete autobiography. I really want it to be a good story. So it's really a story about the second sail around the world, but it's a story of my discovery, and getting dear to myself, and then actually coming back and discovering that I'm an Asperger's kid, and having all the pieces of my puzzle fit together, so that I can actually have what's the word? I can have an expectation for myself that's appropriate. I used to think I could be a great teacher, but in truth, one-on-one with folks, I am a great teacher, but I couldn't be part of the academia. Academia is too gray. It didn't work out. And I've just been finding myself. I have a whole new way to live my life. And I feel like for the first time in my life, I have the opportunity to not be driven by my past and driven by my inward being. Instead, I have an ability to be much more connected with a present energy that's giving me an opportunity to live brand new every day and to experience something brand new in my life, and brings me to being able to do something wonderful like be with all you folks tonight. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
There were no more questions in the chat, but I will say this. I've spoken with you a number of times and getting ready for this. I was not prepared for some of the pieces of your story, and I am very much inspired by it. And I hope that everyone else on the call, I think everyone else feels the same way. So now I'm actually going to end the recording and let everyone kind of chat in again and bring up any questions that they want to bring up to you.